Just a quick intro for people who don't know me. Like my name is Saravana. I'm the founder of Coware Limited. People basically know us from BizTalk 360. So we have done a significant work on building some good management and monitoring tools for BizTalk server. And the knowledge what we acquired in this integration space over 20 years is what helped us to look at the gaps on the serverless space and helped us to build a serverless 360. Let me dive into the slide. Okay. Yeah. So just to give you like a background of, what is the real pain point we are seeing right now at the moment and how we are going to address it in serverless 360. So this is one of the typical kind of application you will see these days companies building up. So the whole notion of building applications has changed now with the adoption of cloud. So it's more like a Lego blocks these days, right? So you pull pieces from all over the place to construct your application. So if you look at this particular scenario, okay, there is Power Apps at the start to for the user interface. There are some bits in the middle on the Azure running in the Azure, and finally the data is going to Microsoft Dynamics or some other data store at the back. And this is a very typical model you will see again and again in multiple forms. So in this case, the data comes into API management, and then it gets into service bus queues or topics, and then it picked up by logic apps, and there's some data that gets into SQL Azure, and a few more functions or connectors, and then gets into Microsoft Dynamics CRM. This is well and good in terms of development. This is fantastic because you don't need to worry about any infrastructure. You don't need to have BizTalk environments or anything like that. You can spin off, you can log into the Azure portal and you can construct this application maybe in like, a couple of hours, you can have something functioning in a really nice way. That's fine. But if you look at the management side of the story, like there's lots and lots of these applications are built now, and it's all over the place, and it's so difficult to manage them. Like if you log into Azure portal these days, you have like lots and lots of resources and resource groups and hanging all over the place. But you cannot get the visibility of, like this is my application responsible for this one activity of pushing data from Power Apps to Dynamic CRM. And how do you manage it? How do you give access to people to this application, or how do you monitor this entire composite application? So the challenge in the Azure portal is all bits and pieces here and there, and we are bringing this concept of composite applications and how you can manage it. Mike, so what is we also wanted to differentiate very clearly what is the positioning of Microsoft and us, because at the end of the day we don't want to replicate things what Microsoft is already doing and duplicate effort and not positioning the offering correctly. So if you look at what Microsoft is good at, they're really good at providing platforms. For example, you need to have really scalable service bus queuing platform which can deal with millions and millions of messages. Same with logic apps and functions and stuff like that. So traditionally, if you look at Microsoft, so they are really good at platform players, but when it comes to some the management and monitoring side of the story, it's always there are gaps and there are partners who filled up those gaps. And when we look at Azure, actually we don't see that many partners really filling the gap what we are trying to fill. Okay, there are people like Datadog and Neuralink and App Dynamics, but they are also trying to do something similar to what Microsoft is already doing with log analytics and Azure Monitor and things like that. But we are taking a different view of application concepts and how we can support a day-to-day a person who is actually responsible for running these apps. So this is how it looks like. Okay, the big box is Azure, and typically you'll have some kind of an Azure administrator looking at the health of all these different services running inside the Azure. So there are a lot of subscriptions and resource groups, and the companies are using a bulk of things like Security Center and Logic Apps and this and that. And so the role of this Azure administrator is more aligned with in a traditional world like a DBA world, where DBA is responsible for the health of SQL Server, but not necessarily knowing exactly how your database is used on a day-to-day basis and what kind of applications running, whether the applications are, like functioning correctly at an application level access is missing. So if you look at this one, like what the gap, what we're trying to fill is on the person on the support side. It's a IT support team. Right now, even as a company, like we have like a couple of SaaS applications and we have used a lot of Azure resources. We're a bit scared to give access to the support team to the Azure portal because setting up security and access is a big pain. Even though you can do it technically, you can do it, but it's not that simple to set up user roles and responsibilities. And also, Azure is something dynamically changing every day. Like you go and set up something today, and all of a sudden something changes next day, right? So right now, we ourselves do not give full access to the Azure portal for and the only people with a high knowledge, they know exactly what they're doing, got access to the Azure portal. So that's the problem we are trying to address. How do we bring the low end IT support team to effectively manage Azure resources? Is what we are trying to address with Serverless 360. So that's exactly what we have built with Serverless 360. And once you see the demo, you'll be able to understand better. So this is just a story. Like when we started, it's nearly 2 years now since we started. We pivoted a little bits and pieces here and there, and we initially started with better tooling for just Azure Service Bus, and later realized, okay, the whole serverless thing is picking up, and we need to look at the big picture. And we pivoted about a year ago, back in 2017. We said we are going for a bigger scope, and that's when we switched to a bigger picture of serverless and covering a lot of other technologies other than service bus as well. So and also Azure is so big, we can't, as a small team, we cannot cover everything up. So we picked up technologies which are relevant to serverless world. So these are all the typical Microsoft Azure technologies. They are more like a PaaS and serverless, and people use it to build applications as Legos. So things like event grid functions, logic apps, storage, and API management, etc. So these are all the core technologies what we cover in serverless. Not We don't have all of them at the moment, but this is how it looks. Like majority of them are there, and we are also adding things constantly. So the remaining stuff we have a roadmap of covering up in the next 2 to 3 months, because we have this big integrate event coming in June. Before integrate, we wanted to cover up the entire stack. API management is a big ask right now from a lot of our current customers and potential prospects. So that's something we are picking it as a top priority. Same SQL Azure as well, and web jobs and web apps. So what is the real requirement for serverless 360? Like what problem we are trying to solve. So as I mentioned, application visibility is one top thing, because right now, if you log into Azure portal, it's very loosely connected things. Like it's artifacts all over the place, either it's in a single subscription or maybe in a multiple subscription, multiple resource groups, etc. So we wanted to bring this application visibility. And the second thing is we're also bringing a lot of tooling as well. For example, if you look at Service Bus, the Azure portal is very minimal. So you end up using something like Service Bus Explorer, right? And which is an open source tool done by Pablo. It's not maintained, but still people need that kind of functionalities, like viewing the messages, resubmitting messages, clearing the dead letters, and those kind of hard code functionalities are also missing in Azure portal. And I don't think Microsoft will address this gap, because once you go deeper and deeper into some technology stack, then Azure portal will eventually become unmanageable and bigger. When you look at the very early days of Azure, like back in, like 7, 8 years ago, they went down the route of having like custom portals for SQL and EDI and stuff like that. If you remember that old Silverlight portal, and they soon realized that's again, it's not manageable for a company like Microsoft, because then people are really confused. So we can see there is a real challenge of somebody like us filling up the gap of a deep tooling, application visibility, and looking from an IT support perspective. And that's exactly what we're doing with Serverless 360. So it comes with things like really consolidated monitoring at an application level, security at application level, having auditing capabilities, like if somebody reprocess the message or somebody deleting items and things like that. So that's a primary goal for us with Serverless 360. So this is again, it's a different picture, like how you can represent an application. This is all different scenarios, what you typically see, like a message coming into queues or a messaging getting hit by functions, and then it's going all over the place. So these are all the different scenarios what you will see day in, day out today with Azure customers. At this stage, let me pass it on to Elil. So now you got a picture of what problem we are trying to solve, and what is the expertise we are trying to pitch in. And now let's dive straight into serverless application itself, so that you get an understanding of how we are solving this problem. Yeah, it's over to you, Elil. Yeah.
Thanks, Saravana. Thanks for the overview. And like as Saravana was rightly mentioning, now I'm going to substantiate his statements with the real demo of the product. Let us pick up each and one of the needs that we listed down just now, and we'll see how serverless can fill in the gap that Azure Portal, making Azure Portal a better tool to work with and making the life of Azure users much better. So this is the homepage of Serverless 360, wherein I have an whole picture of all my applications logically grouped into composite applications. A composite application can have entities from different Azure resource groups, different subscriptions, or different regions. So I get an holistic view of all my applications at one place, and in the list view, when you have huge number of composite apps, get an overview of all of them at one place. And in the card view, get little more details on by entities categorized by their type, and a status of the entities based on the monitoring we have scheduled. And if at this point, if you're wondering how does Serverless 360 get access to your Azure resources, it is through the most secure way using service principles. You can create a service principal, which could be an Active Directory application with contributor level of access on your resources, resource groups, or at subscription level associated to Serverless 360, and that is it. Your entities would be readily available to be associated to a composite application. The moment I associate and resource into a composite application, management and monitoring of them comes handy. So now I get an view of my application, my entities grouped together to form a business solution, thus overcoming the first and foremost challenge of application visibility.
Can I just ask on that? You show
Yes.
the lines by lines. That can be aggregated into a traffic light system type view, can it? As far as the overall service.
Yes.
So here we are. Sorry, I missed that. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. So this is a list view wherein you can view all your applications with the basic information on how many entities are undergoing any error. And if I want to get detailed view, I can get into the errors. I can check what is the error this particular entity is encountering. And this state is based on the monitors that I have created, which we would cover up as we proceed further. So are we good to continue? Shall I proceed?
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Yes. So we have addressed the first challenge. The next, the deep and integrated tooling support. Let us consider a business scenario to understand this much better. So I'm considering a simple e-commerce scenario wherein I have an external website through which my customer submits a new order. For every new order, I have a service bus message being pushed in. I have a logic app which listens to this queue, picks up every new order with the help of an Azure function. It validates whether the order has all necessary information or not. So here it makes a decision and pushes that message into a topic with a label which says whether the order is accepted or rejected. So based on this label, I want these messages to be auto filtered into the respective subscriptions of my topic, which are accepted and rejected. So this is my scenario. Let us try to understand what or all the deep and integrated tooling requirement a person would encounter, an Azure user would encounter as they try to build this scenario and move it to production. So let me pick up that composite application wherein I have grouped the entities that constitute this orchestration. And herein, my first and foremost requirement is to create the entities. So we have capability in Serverless 360 itself, wherein you can create your entities right from Serverless 360. So in case if you have created your topic subscription from the Azure portal. And one of the business needs here is to define the topic subscription rules. So we cannot do this straight away in the portal. So I can use Serverless 360 wherein I can manage my topic subscription rules. I can define a rule which will auto filter my messages based on the label that is being sent to this particular with the message. This is use case one. Say if my requirement is, say I am constructing my business orchestration and I would like to ensure things are working fine. So in course of developing this, I would like to investigate on a certain error that my logic app has encountered. So as most of the developers report, debugging is one key challenge that everybody faces while working with serverless architectures. So here in Serverless 360, I can get into the details of run actions of a specific logic app. And from the logic app input and output bindings, I try to identify which specific service bus message has been processed in this execution. And now I would be interested in knowing the details of this message because of why the logic app would have failed. So I'm getting into the queue and I want to pick that specific message from the active end of the queue to understand what is the content and properties of this messages so that I can investigate on why that specific logic app failed. So I get to access the message content and properties of the message through Serverless 360 from the active end of the queue. And we retrieve this message in peak lock mode, so this message would still be available for my downstream application to process. See, with all these debugging facilities, I have built my orchestration in my staging environment. I have tested it. It all works fine. Now I would like to import my entities from the staging environment into my production environment. If this is a use case, I can use Serverless 360 to import my entities from my staging environment into my production environment. So when I do this import action, I can ensure that the entity will be imported with its definition of properties. And if I have defined topic subscription rules, all that would get immediately imported. And this can save considerable amount of testing and development effort. See, one another use case one of our customers recently much appreciated is like, say, I get into the topic subscription. Say, I have imported entities from my staging to production. Let me associate them to the composite application so that I can manage them right here. So this topic in my staging environment had 3 subscriptions, 2 of them in active state and 1 of them was in disabled state. It has got exactly imported. And now if I want to modify the state of this topic subscription, it is quite simple. We can do it right away from Serverless 360 itself. So these are few of the management capabilities that we have. Along with that, you can manage shared access policies of your entities. Say you would like to provide a connection string with limited permission to your client applications to work on the queue. You can create a policy with need only permission and share with the client applications. So all that is possible. We clearly address those critical tasks needed by Azure users so that we can make their life much better. So next key challenge that when I have a lot of service bus queues and topics, one of the key challenges that an Azure user would encounter is message processing, because we do not have any visibility of messages in the Azure portal, but day in and day out there could be need for us to repair and resubmit or resubmit the messages which has been dead lettered due to various reasons. So let us consider an simple human resource management system wherein there is a need for message processing. So let me pick up that composite application which represents this scenario, and from the summary I get to know that few of my queues are encountering error, and the error states that the dead letter message count is way beyond the expected value. So the reason behind this could be the logic app which is listening to this queue, which is supposed to process the messages, is disabled due to some reason, because of which the messages would have got time to live expired and they have been pushed into the dead letter queue. So I can take a decision to turn on the logic app right from Serverless 360 itself. And now my need is to resubmit those dead lettered messages back into the active end of the queue so that they would be reprocessed by the logic app, which is enabled now. So I'm getting into the dead letter end of the queue which had number of dead letter messages. Here I have two options, either to retrieve the messages in the peak lock mode or in the defer mode. I choose to defer mode because I would like to reprocess the messages. So when I retrieve messages in defer mode, processing of the messages become possible. So when I say processing, what is that I can do? I can either choose to delete the messages. Say I can filter out messages by an error reason. Say imagine your application is going to dead letter the messages with a custom error reason like invalid employee ID. So I can choose to take an action like purging those messages which has been dead letter due to invalid employee ID. Or if the message is TTL expired, I would like to resubmit it back to the active end of this or a different queue. So at this time of resubmission, I have an option to back up my message to one of the associated storage account too. And at the time of resubmission, I can choose either to resubmit to the same queue or to a different queue. The moment I selected one of my queue's unique registrations, you would have noticed an information box popping up saying the target queue I have selected has requires duplicate deduction property enabled, and I have to consider regenerating the message IDs to prevent them from getting lost. So this is a specific scenario wherein if the message ID is found to be duplicate within the duplicate deduction time frame window, then the message would get lost. It would neither be found in the source queue nor in the target queue. So to overcome this, Serverless 360 proactively informs the user that you are attempting to resubmit to an requires duplicate deduction enabled queue. So please consider regenerating the message IDs before submission. So I have two options here. I can either regenerate it into an unique GUID ensuring it is unique, or I can also modify it as per my business requirement and proceed to resubmit. So now my message from employee registration is getting resubmitted into unique registrations, from where my downstream application would pick it up and then process. Because I chose to back up this message, it has been backed up into the associated storage blob account. So if my requirement is slightly different, say I want to modify the message content or its properties before I would like to proceed to resubmit. Say I would like to add an property which is mandatory expected by my downstream application, and I would like to inform my downstream application that this is an repat message, process it a different way. I can add an user property. If I am submitting to a session enabled QR topic, I can attach a session ID. I can schedule this message to be enqueued at a specific time, and herein I can choose to resubmit either to the same queue or to a different target. So this way I have modified the content of the message. I have added necessary properties. If required, I can even schedule this message to be encoded at the specific time and proceed to resubmit. So I pulled 10 messages in defer mode from the dead letter end, but I acted on 3 of them. So if I want to process the remaining messages at later point in time, I can always access them from the deferred dead letter end. So these are outstanding message processing capabilities what Serverless 360 offers. But what if my requirement is some amount of automation which can automatically take care of managing my dead letter messages? I do have an option to do that too. We have activities which can auto manage our dead letter queues. See here, if my requirement is to create an activity which will automatically resubmit TTL expired messages, I can create one by choosing the appropriate action, by choosing the source and the target queue to which I would like to act on, and I can filter out those messages by their dead letter resend. It can even be a custom resend, and I can process only those messages which has been enqueued at a specific time. Say if my logic app was disabled at a specific time, I can process those messages which has been enqueued at the time of my logic app being disabled. I can also fire this activity on specific count of messages, and this activity can be scheduled to automatically run and take care of managing my dead letter queue.
Can I just ask a question that's on a bit of a tangent from here, but you're obviously working with a number of queues here. The interaction between Service 360 and a customer's environment, is it a single service principal and you effectively give it rights to access all of these resources, or is it done on a per resource level? How is all this coming together at a basic kind of authentication authorization level?
Yeah, you can have multiple service principals that has been associated, and all the entities would get listed here in a composite application. Say if you want to provide a specific set of people access to HRM and different set of people to e-commerce, and that is where we bring in the application level security. So you can define a granular user access policy for users at the composite application level.
Okay, so you have a service principal that represents a group of users, and then when they're interacting, they're essentially using that particular service principal.
Not really. A service principal decides the serverless 360's access to the resources. For users access to the resources, we have a dedicated user management section, which we would be covering up as we proceed further. So should
Okay. I'll let you carry
talk
on.
about this now?
Yeah, I would like to interrupt here. So to just give much more clarity here, Serverless 360 uses service principal to gain access to Azure resources through the Azure subscription. So you can create or you can register more than one service principal with Serverless 360, and with a single service principal, you can provide access to multiple Azure resources. For example, if you have multiple Azure subscriptions and your Azure resources are spread across those subscriptions, you can create a service principal in each and every Azure Active Directory and give a set of resources in your subscription access to it, and register as many service principal with Serverless 360, so that you give the portal, you give the resources access to Serverless 360. Then on top of it, we have brought the user management. So your end users at Serverless 360 will be managing all your resources from the Serverless 360 context. They need not log into Azure portal and switch between the subscriptions.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that's great. So are we good to continue?
Yes.
Yes, we just saw the message processing capabilities and scope for automating them using activities. So next challenge is like we do have Azure monitors, log analytics, and application insights, and the monitoring that we provide is slightly different from whatever the portal provides. So we application insights provides and continuous monitoring from the day you create your app service. Do you want to continuously monitor? You can go ahead with application insights. So what Serverless 360 offers is a consolidated monitoring. So as we say, we have logically grouped our entities into composite applications. At any point in time, I would be interested in knowing what is the state of my application, so which is again constituted by my entities. So I would be interested in knowing at least if one of the entities in my composite application encounters an error based on the configuration that I have made, and I need an report on that, an alert on it. So when we talk about monitoring, so when we monitor something, we need to keep the respective stakeholders notified on that. So there comes in the notification channel supported by Serverless 360. So we have support to 6 different notification channels: PagerDuty, SMTP, Slack, Webhook, OMS, and Microsoft Teams. And here this webhook is an interesting component wherein you can integrate your custom cloud applications to Serverless 360 using the webhook notification channel. Say if you have a ticketing system, and as and when an alert is generated, you would like to create a ticket in your ticketing system. That can be achieved using webhook notification channel. You can have an custom cloud application in between which will receive the alert and create a corresponding ticket in your ticketing management system. So now if the moment we have set the notification channels, we can get into the composite applications monitoring part, and let us see what are the different types of monitors that Serverless 360 offers. We have 4 different types of monitors, each one of them to address a specific business need. Say if my requirement is to get an consolidated report of all my entities in my composite app at specific time interval, then my choice should be an status monitor. A status monitor can be configured to send out reports at specific days of a week at specific times of a day through the configured notification channels. Say if this status report is applicable to a specific support team, I can turn on them and then update this monitor. And to a status monitor, unlike Azure Monitor, you can have all the entities of this composite application mapped into a single status monitor. Hence, you can get an consolidated report. And the resources mapped into an monitor can have a configuration based on their properties. Say this is a queue wherein I can monitor them based on the status of the queue or on various properties like size or message count, active message count, or dead letter message count. So based on my purpose, I set up a configuration with a warning and error threshold values, and when the actual value goes beyond the value and warning and error threshold, I am going to get an error report. So let us see how an sample status monitors report would be. As I was saying, we would get an consolidated report, and here is an consolidated report at the application level, which gives me the status of all my entities based on the configurations that I have made. Say if my requirement is slightly different, say I want to monitor on the status and the properties, but I need to get alerts only when there is a violation in the configuration that I have made. Then my choice should be an threshold monitor. So this threshold monitor can be configured to detect violation for a specific duration of time. Say here when I set 4 minutes, this monitor will let the logic app state to be not as expected state for 4 minutes of time. When it is not as expected, even after 4 minutes, then I'm going to get the alerts. And the number of alerts for every violation can even be configured to prevent spamming on the configured notification channels. I can schedule these alerts to be run only on specific days. Say if my logic app that I am monitoring is working only on off business days, then I can choose only the selected days and select the duration within which this monitor is expected to check for the expected state. And I can configure the notification channels through which I would like to get the report on. And to a threshold monitor too, I can associate entities of different types that belong to this specific composite application, and I can provide an configuration based on the properties that they hold. So this is a function app. I am monitoring its status, whether it is expected as per expected state or not. Say if my requirement is to detect failure in my logic app or the function app that plays a key role in my business orchestration, then my choice should be an watch monitor. So even in a watch monitor, I can define the frequency within which I would like to get notified on any failure in my composite app. So I can set the respective notification channels, and I can associate entities which can be a logic app, a function app, or an API endpoint. The moment I associate a logic app or a function app into the watch monitor, it is going to keep investigating on the execution logs of the logic app and the function app. So in case of logic app, the trigger histories and run histories will be continuously investigated at the specified frequency, and in case of any failure, I would get a notification with a clear report on what was the error. Say when I created this logic app in the beginning, I associated it to the watch monitor, and I was trying to understand why this specific logic app fails. And this watch monitor alert helped me in understanding what was the reason behind the failure with the exact failure reason. So this way I can use the watch monitor to detect failure in my orchestrations. Say if my requirement is to monitor my entities at different perspective. Say I have a logic app, I want to have an eye on the consumption of the logic app. Or I have an service bus queue, I want to have an eye on the server errors or the uh, uh, user errors that are being created in the queue. Then my choice should be an data monitor. So here is a service bus queue that is associated to a data monitor, and I have configured to have an eye on the user errors and server errors. So user errors are going to give me an insight on how are the applications interacting with my queue, handling the queue. Are they generating exceptions? I can get notified based on the user errors generated in the service bus queue. Say if my Azure region is down for some reason, server errors triggered on the queue would keep me notified that my client applications are not going to have my service bus queue at this time for processing. I can have an eye on the size of the queue, the count of messages, say within a specific duration, every 15 minutes, if I anticipate certain number of messages to income and outgo, I can set up alerts on these metrics to have an eye on them. So this data monitor is one monitor which can be configured to monitor the entities at various perspectives. So to summarize, we have 4 different types of monitors, each one of them to meet specific business needs. The choice can be made based on what is that we would like to achieve. So now coming to the point of application level security. As Saravana was rightly mentioning, we would not be comfortable in providing access to the Azure portal to our support team, but still they need to be aware of the application status. So here in Serverless 360, you can provide them with a granular user access policy, and moreover, you can govern and audit each and every action that the user does on your Azure entities through Serverless 360. So here is a dedicated user management section wherein you can manage your users who are authorized to access your Azure entities through Serverless 360. So to have an overview of different authentication modes that Serverless 360 supports, the choice can be made at the time of sign up to the SaaS portal or at the installation when it is a private hosted version. You can choose between basic authentication mode, which is an email ID password combination mode, or Active Directory integration. So, and the moment you configure one of the authentication modes, we would be ending up with two default roles: administrator, who would have complete access throughout the application. This would be the user who signed up to this account, and super users can be any number of users authorized by the administrator who will have access throughout the application except for the payment and licensing section. So things get interesting as we get into the custom role. Along with this, you can create any number of custom roles with granular user access policy definition. See, herein I'm creating an order process manager, and I can define a granular user access policy at the composite application level. Say the set of users mapped to this role should have access only to OM staging composite app. And even within the composite application, I can define what are all the actions they are authorized to perform. I can provide them with overall permission, and I can restrict them to an extent like whether they should be able to resubmit messages to other queues, or should we restrict them to the source queue only.
Can you just comment on Azure AD backing for this, as in using claims to map through? Right? Is that possible, or is that on your roadmap?
Like Azure, can you come again? Sorry.
So security groups and the base being in Azure AD, is there any link through there, or is there anything on your roadmap to put a link in place so you could use security group mechanisms to push membership?
Yes, we do have in our roadmap to include security groups or Active Directory groups to which you can define an access policy for a set of users.
Perfect. Right. Thank you.
Yes. So you can restrict your people from managing the entities so that they do not do any modifications to the properties of the entities or modify the state of the entities through Serverless 360. So the moment I define a custom role, I can invite users either from the associated Active Directory or from through the email based on the authentication mode that I have selected. So herein I have I'm inviting people from my associated Active Directory, and we do have support to multiple Active Directories too, provided the users from different Active Directories are invited as guest users. So I select my users and add them to the custom role to provide them access based on the granular user access policy that I just defined. So when we have multiple users working on our entities, we should always have an eye on what is the actions do they perform. So here we have a dedicated governance and audit section which tracks user actions on your entities within Serverless 360. So we have three different sections into which we categorize these actions. Operations captures CRUD operations on your entities, say like modifying the state of the entity or defining an authorization rule and so on. Say as a part of this demo, we were carrying out certain resubmission and reparent resubmission activities, which is also captured here. And we can view the details to an extent like what was the message content did I modify and what was the property did I add as a part of this activity. And this report will be retained in the database for 30 days. However, this can be exported to an Excel or PDF format too. So to summarize, we identified the need in managing and monitoring serverless integrations to make the Azure users' life much better, and we have come up with solutions from Serverless 360. You get an application visibility using composite applications, group entities from different subscriptions and regions into a composite application, and manage them from right here. We have deep integrated tooling support using the management capabilities, define your entities, entities here, import, modify their properties, manage shared access policies, or even debug using the deep integrated tooling supports extended. Message processing is a challenge. We have excellent message processing capabilities, resubmit, repair and resubmit, or even automate processing your dead letter messages using activities. You need a consolidated monitoring. We have 4 different types of monitors to monitor your composite applications and get a consolidated report on your entity state. Application level security policy definition is a need. We have a user access policy in place, create custom roles with granular user access policy at application level. We need governance and auditing. We have governance and auditing, which tracks each and every action of the user within Serverless 360 on your Azure entities. So by now, if you are interested in trying out the product, we have choice in hosting too. You can opt for a quick option of trying out the SaaS version in our infrastructure, or have a Serverless 360 running in your private hosted environment. We are also available in Azure Marketplace.